Jai Shri Ram. Whenever the topic of the growth of Islam in the Indian subcontinent is discussed, many people from our ideological side, meaning pro-Hindu, pro-Hindutva type people, like to say that the Muslims converted people by force and that's the only reason that we have all of the Muslims that we have in India today. While it's obviously true that Muslims did use violence and the threat of violence to convert some number of people, I think that we often get overly fixated on that, and that actually poses a huge stumbling block in our attempts to try to deal with this situation in India that we have now. So, if you were to look at any part of India, especially pre partition India, and I say pre partition India since there have been migrations that change the demographics, if you look at, say, Rajasthan having a tiny Muslim population, and then just across the border in Punjabi Pakistan or Pakistani Punjab having an enormous Muslim population. Obviously, those things in Bengal and so on, you have people who Hindus who left Pakistan to come to India and Muslims who left India to come to Pakistan. So that's why I'm talking about pre-partition. The only place where you'd really see an overwhelming Muslim domination to the point of being, like 95% plus would be the far northern parts of West Pakistan, so to speak, meaning like Northwest Frontier area and places like that. Because in other parts of, Punjab or Sindh and so on, you had a large Hindu presence. Obviously, it was a minority, but it wasn't a minority of 1 or 2%. It was far more than that. Prior to partition, Sindh was something like 20% Hindu or so. So what you saw across India was that every region had some number of Hindus and some number of Muslims, which is, of course, not what you see in places like Central Asia or even Iran, where pretty much the entire population became Islamized. So people living in the same areas under the same rule, what we see in India is some of these people converted to Islam, and even within the same district level or the taluk level that you see that with Muslim villages neighboring Hindu villages in rural areas or Muslim neighborhoods neighboring Hindu neighborhoods in urban areas. And the reason that this is important to bring up is that when a Hindu population was ruled over by a Muslim ruling class who forced them to pay jizya, forced them to live as second-class or third-class citizens, as dhimmis in their own land and destroyed their temples and so on, we're all aware of the terrible things that they did. Some of the Hindus converted, but not all. So you have Hindus living under the equal level of abuse and terrible treatment at the hands of the Muslims that other Hindus are, but only some of them choose to alleviate that by converting while others did not. And there's basically two reasons I think this is important to talk about. One, there are divisions of class and caste that factor in, but you have a larger issue of a Hindu identity, Hindu culture, Hindu-ness, not meaning enough to some people such that they were willing to give that up in the hopes of attaining some, social or material advancement. And two, we have this mental block of, Hindus that I see time and time again where people want to conflate Turkic invaders like Ghori and Ghazni or later Turkic rulers of India like Aurangzeb and Alauddin Khilji and all of those people with the current day Indian Muslim population. Now, I know that leftists try to draw an artificial distinction between these two groups because they want to push this kind of Hindu Muslim bhai Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb kind of a fantasy narrative that they have. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about being realistic in the sense that Central Asian Turkic people who had basically no real culture before they were converted to Islam. Before they converted to Islam, they were violent marauders. After they converted to Islam, they were still violent marauders. That's a totally different type of a mindset and type of a human being than someone who was Hindu for, their entire history of their family going back generations and generations and only converted to Islam relatively recently, right? If you think about how invaders came into India, they didn't really bring a lot of women and children. They converted local women into Islam. Then a lot of their children were, of course, half Indian, and then these people convert more and more. And so the actual ancestors of the vast majority of the ancestors of the Indian Muslim population are people who were Hindus and converted, as opposed to people who actually came from the outside, right? They chose a religion which is foreign. So they're much more like traitors to our people than they are outsiders, because again, they didn't continue to immigrate in from Afghanistan and Uzbekistan and so on, right? And this is especially important because we have many people in our own side that like to play up the fact that Indian Muslims are similar to Indian Hindus in many ways, in which they differ from Arab and Persian and Turkic Muslims, and that we're supposed to somehow, as Hindus, be very proud of this. But what these people don't really seem to realize is that this isn't because foreign Adharmic people from outside came into India and then became Indianized. It's actually because of the exact opposite. Native Dharmic people came under a foreign cultural ideological influence and then adopted some of those traits. The fact that they didn't totally become Arab, as you see in, say, North Africa or something, that's a pretty normal thing. If you look at Islamic conversion throughout the world, in the vast majority of places, you look at Southeast Asia, you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, people do retain a lot of their old pre-Islamic cultural practices and beliefs and traditions. There's nothing to really jump up and down and be proud of that they're somehow Dharmic and Swadeshi and this and that. This is just a normal thing. It's very abnormal to actually supplant your entire culture and replace it with something else. That's not really a normal thing that's happened. You do see it in places like North Africa, but even there, the actual genetics of the people were radically changed also. So this is also important to note, like I said earlier, that our own people chose to convert when obviously they were under difficult circumstances. But some of the people chose to convert and some of them did not. And when you have a situation where some people choose to convert and some people don't, that's obviously similar to what you have today with the phenomenon of Christian conversion, where Christians try to convert a large swath of the Hindus by using all of these kinds of monetary enticements and so on. Some of the people fall into that and some don't. So, to keep all of these things in mind, I think is important, because in order to try to combat any problem that you have in society, whether it's Christianity or Islam, whether it's something that's relatively new or something that's ongoing or a new modern version of a fairly old medieval problem, we have to understand it in an accurate kind of a way first. And I like to, really harp on this, because what I see from people on our side all the time is that they either go to one extreme to say that Indian Muslims are somehow totally different from Indian Hindus, and they actually came from the outside and they're, Central Asian migrants. That's one inaccurate extreme. Then you have the other inaccurate extreme to say that because of the fact that they're, of the same basic genetic stock as us, that the massive differences in ideology that they have themselves adopted out of their own free will are somehow not important, and we should only focus on the, Salafi, Wahhabi indoctrination through Saudi madrasas and textbooks, as opposed to the actual native Islamic problem. I think that we are a people that's subject to a lot of knee-jerk reactions. We're a very emotional kind of people, and both of those things, having knee-jerk reactions and using your emotions to make your decisions instead of logic, just continue to make you blind to whatever problems do exist, and the fact that you have to actually instill and inculcate within people an idea that you are Hindu, you have this Hindu identity, this is meaningful, this is the basic fiber of who you are at the core, and this should not be given up. This is not a decision on where to go to college or a decision on what company that you want to work for that you can just choose to take up or change based on your own personal predilections or your own personal material kinds of wants and desires. Now, something that I also wanted to touch on is, before I close, is that whenever any Abrahamic religion does anything negative to the Hindus, they do that because this is in their basic nature. Their basic nature is to be predatory, harmful, and grow through conversion. This is what's made them the two largest religions in the world. So to somehow say that, Indian Muslims or Indian Christians that don't really have much of an actual understanding of what their religion says or the history of how the religion spread and so on, to say that their ignorance is somehow indicative of the fact that these religions are not as harmful as we understand that they are, that again speaks to how Hindus continue to not understand problems, not understand their own history, their own religion, other religions, or any of these different topics that, you have to understand in order to try to build some kind of a strategy and protect yourself and defend yourself moving forward. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram.